Despite being a hopeless sci-fi and retro gaming nut, one of my favourite movies of all time is in fact a romantic comedy of sorts. No, not that one. This movie goes by the name of Lost in Translation. In its simplest terms, Lost in Translation is a low-key romantic story about a pair of culturally alienated Americans knocking about in a hotel in Tokyo. It stars Scarlett Johansson as Charlotte and Bill Murray as Bobo-san.
時間がないんだよ、ボブさん。ね?
Bob is there to film a Japanese whiskey commercial. Charlotte is accompanying her celebrity photographer husband. Strangers in a foreign land, the two find escape, distraction, and understanding amidst the bright Tokyo lights after a chance meeting in the quiet lull of the hotel bar. They form a bond that is as unlikely as it is heartfelt and meaningful. Those were not my words, can you tell? In a recent interview, its director Sofia Coppola talked about the inspiration behind the movie. I spent a lot of time in Tokyo in my 20s, and I really wanted to make a film around my experience of just being there. That was the starting point, recalls Coppola. I got married not long before and kind of felt isolated. I was in this stage where I wasn't sure if I'd make the right choices or what I was doing in the post-college beginning of my adult life, she says. Brief encounter was in my mind while writing, but I was looking a lot at the idea of being connected, because at that moment, I wasn't. As she developed the relationship between Bob and Charlotte, Coppola was compelled by the juxtaposition of the characters having similar internal crises at different stages of their lives. She cited the dynamic between Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall in The Big Sleep as a source of inspiration for their relationship. I wanted the movie's structure to have all the different parts of a relationship condensed into a few days, she explains. They meet, they break up. I had a look in mind. It was this kind of dreamy feeling of when you're jet-lagged. There's all this neon and it had kind of a Blade Runner feel, she adds. I was definitely listening to music when we were filming and when I was writing too. That was the music I was listening to at the time, stuff with that Tokyo dream pop feeling. Combined with those visuals and the half-awakeness, the dreamy music gave it a romantic quality. After a great deal of trouble tracking down and securing Bill Murray and getting financing for the film, for the shoot, Coppola arrived in Tokyo loaded with maps, blueprints, sketches, snapshots, she's an accomplished photographer, and an iPod ready to communicate what she was looking for. She knew the movie upside down and backward, producer Ross Katz comments. She spilled it right from her head onto the screen. These references included the dreamy noise pop and dissonant guitar textures of the Irish rock group My Bloody Valentine, whose reclusive leader Kevin Shields contributed 4 songs to the film's soundtrack, as well as some of Coppola's favourite films. Wong Kar-wai's In the Mood for Love has the feeling of being on the verge of something happening, Coppola says. She admires the way director Bob Fosse, or Fosse, I don't know, reveals his personal life in all that jazz. I enjoy movies when they're sincere, from personal experience. Fosse got away with his girlfriend playing his girlfriend. It's not an all-romanticised idea of himself, it's honest. And though Antonioni's L'Avventura has no plot, it isn't boring. I like taking your time meandering with the music. There's so much that isn't said in a look. I like observing things. I'm not interested in a lot of dialogue, she says. And true enough, there isn't a huge amount of talking in this film. It's full of characters looking at one another, or looking out of hotel windows, looking around hotel lounges, sitting around in their pink underpants. Because the script was so spare, there was room for spontaneous manoeuvring. A lot of dialogue was added at the spur of the moment, recalls Scarlett Johansson. She allowed us to improvise, and she pulled some ideas, lines, deliveries, movements, silly things like, I'd come in my slippers and she'd say, "Oh, you should put those on." She was perceptive while we were rehearsing. Much of the film was shot dogma style. Ironically, Coppola discovered that it was easier to run and gun in a foreign country, where the laissez-faire attitude of the Japanese towards location shooting made things easy. In fact, it was the Americans who asked the Japanese to supply paperwork for every extra and location. With a handheld Atom camera, the filmmakers made impromptu forays onto subway trains and teeming Tokyo streets where the Japanese reluctance to make eye contact was an advantage. And during the shoot, Coppola's brother Roman grabbed second unit shots of blurry neon around the city. While cinematographer Ed Lachman filmed the Virgin Suicides with formal, lockdown, voyeuristic cameras, Lance Accord, who had shot Coppola's first short, A New Tokyo well, photographed Lost in Translation on the run, blending off-the-cut shots of Tokyo streets or hotel window views with intimate close-ups of the characters. Some scenes were almost entirely improvised. There is an awful lot of empty space in this movie. I love it for that reason, amongst others, but I'm aware that it kind of irritates a lot of people. They don't know what the movie is about, they complain that nothing really happens, they think that it's pretentious bollocks. That's absolutely fine, of course, but let me explain why I find this film so pleasurable and endlessly rewatchable. Well, for one thing, Sofia Coppola allows this movie to breathe. You can stick this thing on and actually just sit quietly and peer into it. There are many shots of Tokyo's bustling streets or ancient temples, or shots of our characters sitting around looking out of giant windows or arranging flowers, or talking to feisty old women in hospital waiting rooms. They serve no identifiable purpose whatsoever, but they are nevertheless beautiful or funny or otherwise engaging. They invite us to simply regard them, rather than trying to wrangle us along a well-trodden narrative path. Certain movies that do this kind of thing do irritate me, but this one just strikes the perfect balance for my money. Likewise, the characters of Bob and Charlotte feel pretty real and genuine to me, as does their awkward, stumbling little non-love affair. I would never denigrate anyone's enjoyment of your typical rom-com tropes, but this film is all the more sweet and affecting because it avoids slipping into them, without going out of its way to do so. It is light on spectacle and narrative conceit, it is intimate and sweetly melancholy, and it still makes me chuckle to this day despite having watched it fuck knows how many times now.
Come on, Bob! Come on, Bob! Come on, Bobby, come on, Bobby, come on! Woo! Nice to meet you!
Secondly, the experience of watching it is very much like being in Japan, albeit being in Japan when you're a bored, beautiful, shoegazy lady who lies around all day in pink undies, staring out of hotel windows. I spent 3 months in Japan myself when I was 22 years old, back in the late 2000s. I was a confused, poor, young English lad of modest means with a useless 2-1 degree in cultural studies and few real prospects, and I was most definitely not the esteemed daughter of Francis Ford Coppola. So my experience of wandering about Japan in a rather confused and slightly desperate manner was a bit closer to the bone than Charlotte's, but I can absolutely relate on a certain level to her confusion, listlessness, and faint aura of desperation, even if I don't entirely sympathise with her. It's the classic thing of writing about what you know. Sofia Coppola is writing about her own experiences. I can't hold it against these characters that they have no real problems whatsoever in life, can I? Even high flyers have to find some meaning and empathy in their lives, right? The characters are who they are, and they always feel authentic. They are both stuck, and they are lonely, and I'm sure many of us have found ourselves in this predicament at one time or another. Hell, I went travelling in Japan some 17 years ago now, and I still don't really know what to do with myself, as this video is illustrating quite nicely. Anyway, I'm rambling. Bill Murray is fantastic as Bob Harris.
Let me go, Mr. Harris!
And yeah, the role was written specifically for him, and the film wouldn't work at all were it not for his note-perfect performance, in my opinion. He mostly resists the urge to do his big Bill Murray thing, and that's good, because I think it would have overwhelmed the picture. He manages to strike a perfect balance here. He always stays in character. He is always Mr. Bob Harris.
It's time to return! Okay?
Okay.
Okay?
The music, the cityscapes, the parties, the karaoke, the arcades, the temples, the train rides, they're all very much consistent with my memory of the place, of course, and they're captured beautifully here. This movie is most definitely part travel documentary, and that's a big part of its appeal. I can enjoy it just for the sights and sounds. It's also rapidly becoming part time capsule, as Japan and the rest of the world, of course, rolls ever onward. I mean, just look at the state of some of those early 2000s LCD TVs with their 4-inch silver bezels. Yikes. That being said, this film is now 20 years old, but you wouldn't really know it, save for a few fairly minor details. I mean, if you were to zip back 20 years from this movie, you would most definitely be aware of that fact. Things don't really change like they used to, do they? Not aesthetically, at least. I'm rambling again. More than all this, it really captures almost perfectly that peculiar mixture of excitement, confusion, and a sweet aching sadness that I feel when I think back to my own solo travelling days, be it through Japan or Shanghai or Hong Kong or Southeast Asia. It also makes me want to get back out there someday, of course. When I think of mooching about on my own around Japan, it's a really magical and terrifying goulash of emotions. Being somewhere as alien as Japan for any length of time, as a Westerner, grants you a certain anonymity, paradoxically, and to a degree it temporarily sort of strips you of who you contingently are, giving you the illusion of freedom, but at the same time it's also incredibly isolating and discombobulating. It had that effect on me anyway. This leaves you in a strange kind of purgatory that's by turns exciting, liberating, and incredibly confusing and desperately lonely at times. Japan in particular can be a damn difficult place to get around as an English-speaking foreigner. The people themselves are often shy, individually at least they don't like to make eye contact much, and anonymity is of great importance. The nail that sticks out gets hammered down, and all that business. And then there's the, what's the word I'm looking for? I was turned away from bars a couple of times just for being a foreign barbarian as far as I can tell, and I frequently got eyeballed by security guards who looked at me as if I was going to turn into the Incredible Hulk and start smashing the shit out of the shopping mall at any given moment. Oh, and I remember being hissed at while smoking a cigarette by a group of suited-up salarymen wankers outside a train station in Tokyo one day, in response to which I just chuckled to myself and finished my cigarette quite calmly. Dicks. Don't get me wrong, I had some extremely positive experiences with some of the Japanese folks, particularly the younger ones. In fact, I'd go as far as to say that they were some of the sweetest and most welcoming and innocent folks I've ever encountered. And so yeah, the place remains an enigma to me, and I feel a certain amount of ambivalence towards it, and that's one reason why I continue to be absolutely fascinated by the place and feel a kind of sweet melancholy whenever I think about it. Anyway, what is it about this peculiar state of mind that appeals to me? Well, that's a tough one to answer really, but to this day I have dreams of wandering out into this sort of hypnotic dreamland of neon lights, arcade machines, foreign languages, and just disappearing somehow. Being free of myself. I guess that's it really. Losing oneself. But then there's the reality. Despite the incredible sights, sounds and experiences, and a buzz that I'll treasure for the rest of my days, the reality, of course, is that you'll never quite get what you want. You'll never quite be able to fully disappear. Unless you die, of course, which is fairly possible if you're travelling in Southeast Asia, for example. Anyway, what you're searching for isn't really there, or at least it isn't something you're really able to possess. Maybe you can catch a glimpse of it, maybe you can even touch it for a moment, but that moment will be fleeting, and there it will remain, tantalizingly just beyond your grasp. But the memory and the sense of it stays with you, and perhaps you can even find a little bit of solace, and maybe even some meaning within it. Likewise, the characters in this movie never really get what they want, but they do get something. In terms of the romance, if you can call it that, I think the real masterstroke here is the fact that they don't have a physical relationship, that they don't quite get what they want. As Roger Ebert said in his review 20 years ago, Lost in Translation is too smart and thoughtful to be the kind of movie where they go to bed and we're supposed to accept that as the answer. Sofia Coppola, who wrote and directed, doesn't let them off the hook that easily. They share something as personal as their feelings, rather than something as generic as their genitals. Our main characters have empathized with one another, and that's exactly what they both needed at this particular point in time. As the credits roll, Bob and Charlotte don't solve their problems, but they feel a little better anyway, and life goes on. What did Bob say to Charlotte at the end of the movie? Debate has raged for some 2 decades now, and some claim to know the answer definitively. But of course, it doesn't matter. In fact, I think it's important that we don't ever really know. Coppola herself has said that I always like Bill's answer, that it's between lovers. So I'll leave it at that. Mono no aware is a Japanese idiom for the awareness of impermanence or transience of things, and both a transient gentle sadness or wistfulness at their passing, as well as a longer, deeper, gentle sadness about this state being the reality of life. This wonderful film is all about mono no aware, the transience of things. It's all about the gaps, the romance that never really was, the words left unsaid, or at least unknown, the yucks, the parties, the fleeting sights, sounds and emotions, those little crystalline moments in time.